At the moment at the Nikkei National Museum, we're showcasing Jesse Nishihata. The exhibit is called Jesse Nishihata, a visual storyteller. And Jesse Nishihata was a filmmaker who lived from 1929 until 2006. Sadly, he passed away from Alzheimer's in 2006. But throughout his very active career, he was a filmmaker, best known as a documentary filmmaker.
Being Japanese, all those things happened. But it's not to be sad and regretful about those events of the past. Rather, it's to take pride in being Japanese. But even as it is being felt Japanese at the bottom of the heart, the daily round of life is Canadian. Life today seems so busy, and there are hardly any thoughts about those times. And yet there are moments when they are aroused. Summers were the best times, for the picnics.
Jesse Nishihata was born in Vancouver in 1929 to Japanese immigrant parents who came over from Japan I believe his father came over in 1916. And his father had a tin metal shop on Powell Street. So Jesse, as a baby and all the way until he was about 12, lived happily on Powell Street. Apparently he worked in the local cinema when he was a young boy, and he worked for his dad in the tin metal shop, and went to Lord Strathcona Elementary School. But then all of that changed when the bombing of Pearl Harbor happened. And in 1942, when all of the Canadian citizens of Japanese origin were evacuated from the West Coast and incarcerated in internment camps, Jesse and his family ended up in Tashmi, and he was 13 at the time. That's actually where he got the name Jesse. He was actually Hideo Nishihata until Tashmi, and then he was baptized Jesse at the United Church there. He then, after the internment, there was, in the Japanese-Canadian history, there was a time period there where there was an opportunity for citizens to go back to Japan, and the Nishihata family had thought to do that, but Jesse didn't want to go back. He was Canadian, he was born here, and so I don't know how much influence he had on the family, but the family ended up not going back, and they went to Diamond City, Alberta. He worked in the sugar beet farms for a year, and then the family finally emigrated east, and they ended up in Montreal. So he finished his schooling in Montreal, and then he did go to London, England to pursue graduate studies, but shortly thereafter ended back in Vancouver on the West Coast. From the early 70s, he worked at CBC and was very involved and influential in the development of their documentary film sector in public affairs. So the exhibit is on at the Nikkei National Museum from now, which is the early April, through to May 4th, and with a selection of 4 of his films and 1 tribute film created by his children, actually. His sons, in particular, put together a wonderful 15-minute presentation that really showcases the life of their father. It was funded by the NAJC and is showing on a loop on our big wall in the museum. And then we have 2 smaller private viewing stations where 2 people each can sit and scroll through the 4 other films and see them in their entirety. If we have a large enough group and there's a request to see any of those films on the large wall, we have the flexibility to do that too. The museum is open every day except Monday, so the films will be available. Throughout his career, Jesse did work extensively for about 12 years at CBC, but after 12 years with CBC, he then moved east again and was an instructor on film at the Ryerson Institute, Ryerson College, for many years. And towards the end of his life, he actually was the editor of the Nikkei Voice in Toronto, the Japanese-Canadian community publication. So all throughout, and he was actively a filmmaker. He wasn't just a documentary filmmaker. He also did an incredible art film called The Black Earth, which uses the earth as a metaphor for the woman. And that is also, unfortunately, not in our exhibition, but it's a film that I highly recommend people to search out. So our exhibition is small and it's intimate. It's really set up as a personal viewing opportunity, but it will give anyone who can come down and see it a really lovely overview of this incredibly talented artist, and also a good overview of the selection of films. Particular to internment is his film Watari Dori, which he did during his time at CBC, which explains the whole story using his own family as the basis. And then when the Japanese Canadians received redress in 1988, Jesse was hired to do a documentary film about that whole process. So that film, Justice in Our Times, is in our exhibition as well. So there's lots to see, lots to learn about this fascinating artist. He was very, very humble and unassuming, but influenced a lot of creative people, a lot of creative Nikkei in our country today.
半世紀の暗雲晴れて日経史上最良の日を迎え歓喜に絶えず右上
Nearly half a century ago, in the crisis of wartime, the government of Canada wrongfully incarcerated, seized the property, and disenfranchised thousands of Canadians of Japanese ancestry. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to announce on behalf of the Government of Canada that a comprehensive redress settlement has been reached with the National Association of Japanese Canadians on behalf of their community.
On September 22nd, that day, I was in the House of Commons when the Prime Minister announced the redress agreement. It just brought tears to my eyes because it was the end of a long struggle that we went through with our community, 4.5 years. And for me, it was the most important time, I think, in my life to see that being resolved.
Perhaps the most important element of this redress is the official acknowledgement of the wrongs of the 1940s. But redress must go beyond words and laws, important as they are for our present understanding.